So we're back. Okay, so if everything works out, then each row that we get will be an array containing these things. So let's give it a try. In fact, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's explore it a little bit so you have an example of how to do this. So I'll open Python. I'll say CSV file is equal to open. What was the name of this thing? Jeopardy questions.csv. Okay, we'll import the CSV module and say our reader is a CSV reader. And let's just copy this. Okay. Next, reader. Okay. So if I look at that thing, the first thing that comes out when I say next is that first line, right? And indeed, it seems to be coming out as an array, and it's split up. It's an array of strings. And if you remember what that first line looked like, it was the header line that showed us what the columns meant. The show number, the air date, the round, the category, the value of the question, and the answer. And if we ask for the next line, then we get an actual question. So show number, date, the round, I guess the rounds in Jeopardy have names, the category, the value, the question, and the answer. Okay? And I can ask for the next few lines this way. Okay, so now we know what this thing looks like. We've got our big list of, or we can open this thing and we can read questions. And we want to make this into a game. We'll figure out all the details as we go along, but maybe the first thing we should do is just get all of the questions stored for us. And let's see if we can do that, actually. See if that's feasible for us. So I'll do this in a very slow way. I'll say questions. Starts out as an empty list. And each time I read a row, I'll say questions dot append a row. So let's just see if that's even going to work. All right, so how many questions do we have? 216,931. What are the questions? The 0th question is the header list, so it's not really a question. We'll have to deal with that. But then after that, we have some real questions here. Lots and lots of real questions. Okay? All right. So we're able to read the list of questions. Let's put that into a function. Just like to inspect one thing. Okay, we're fine. So we have to be a little careful. It's not we're not running up against the limits here, but CSV files can be big, right? They can be as big as you want. In this case, the file itself is 32 megabytes. So that's pretty big, and there's a couple 100,000 questions in there. But our computer memories are measured in gigabytes now, so 32 megabytes is something we can easily read into memory and not worry too much. There are times, and especially if you do what they call big data now, when that's not an option. And all of the work that you do on a CSV file is not doing what we're doing here of collecting the whole thing into a giant list, but it's actually processing the lines one at a time, doing something with each line, and then forgetting about it. Because the thing might be many, many gigabytes in size, and you have to process it by scanning it. In our case, we can just load the whole thing into a big list, and then we have random access to things. But more generally, if you're doing big data or big CSV files, then you'd like to do things just by scanning them once without loading the whole thing in memory at any given time. Okay. All right. So if we want to make a quiz game out of this, what should we do? We have something now that can read the list of questions. What's next? So lots of possible features we could add next. I'm open to suggestions. We're going to go slow today, and you guys can drive things. Yep.
How will you be getting live?
What's that?
Like have live, and have to be getting taken on the
Okay. So we'll start writing some function called play game. And so you're suggesting that we should have a variable called lives that starts out as 3, maybe? Sounds good. All right. Yep.
If we consider lives to be like similar to the money cost, we need to add value to the lives when you get a right answer, which would be the same value as the money cost.
Okay. That's a good. There's some fine gameplay things we can try, but we may be getting a little bit ahead of ourselves now. Does our game work yet? Does it do anything yet? It just reads the file. So, if we were going to prioritize the features of a game, a quiz game that repeatedly asks you questions, what's maybe the first feature we could work on? Yeah. Yeah. So let's start with the sort of basic interaction, which is being able to see a question and then answer it. Okay. So I started with reading the whole list of questions, which is kind of a prerequisite for being able to see it and answer it. And the reason I started with that is actually this idea, this reading the whole list of questions for your assignment 4, which is now online. That's basically the kind of code that you're working with. It's reading CSV files. It can be very interesting for testing. And so you guys are set. You can go away and do assignment 4 like immediately after this class, or you can leave right now and start doing it if you like. But I don't recommend that because it's too cold outside. Okay, so we should be able to ask a question. All right, so ask a question, and maybe someone gives us a list of questions. And we saw last class that there's a sort of trick for this. In the random module, if you have a list of things and you want to pick one uniformly at random, you can do random.choice to get your question. Okay. So, all right, our question queue. So if I make this list of, if I read the CSV file and I get this list of questions, and then I take a random choice from that list, then what does queue look like now? What is queue? If we're not sure, we can test it. Okay, so there's a random choice from questions. So what kind of thing is that? Is it a string? What's that? It's a list. It's a list, okay, good. So we know it's a list. So you can't say it's a question by itself. In fact, it's sort of all the information about a question. It's a lot of information about a particular question that was asked in a particular episode of Jeopardy. What parts are we interested in? At least for the purposes now. Yeah? Okay. So the category, maybe the value, and the question itself. So let's say there's our question. So the category is Q at 3, I think. Have a heart. The value is Q at 4. The question itself is Q at 5, and the answer is Q at 6. So we've got our question. Let's grab those things. So category is Q at 3. Value is Q at 4. Question is Q at 5. And the answer is Q at 6. Okay, so we've torn this thing apart into its various pieces now. And now we can print it, right? So we might say something like, what's the category? And then we might print the value. That may or may not be relevant. Depends what our game is supposed to do. Then we should ask the question. So when we ask the user for something, we use input. Input is takes one argument. It's the prompt. So let's see how we want to do this. So maybe we don't want to just print the question, but maybe we want that to be the prompt. Not clear. We'll have to experiment and see how that looks. Let's say reply is equal to input question, or maybe we can and not reply, maybe response. So we ask the user the answer to the question, and then now we've written a lot of code. Let's just say okay, let's see if that works. And let's make the game really simple first, where all it does is reads the questions and asks one question. Okay, category is autobiographies. The value is $800. A songwriter, Bound for Glory. That's the answer, actually, but what's the question? Anybody know? Person who wrote Bound for Glory? I have no idea. Your answer was no idea. The correct answer was Woody Guthrie. So you can see already some of these are going to be tough, right? This is an answer which is actually two words. So maybe the hardest part of this game to make it really polished is actually going to be getting answers. But let's play again. Okay, state capital ideas. Served as the gateway to the 1849 California gold rush. Anyone know the answer? No idea. Sacramento. Category. My name is Earl Warren. This is a $1,200 question. 3-term governor of this state. Not easy questions, are they? Okay. California. Okay, so we seem to be able to ask a question, and we're not really even paying much attention to what the user replies. We're just printing out what their answer was and what the correct answer was. So let's think about what we're going to do with the user's input to decide whether their answer was correct or not. So when we don't know what to do, often, and it looks like it's going to be possibly complicated, often we can just defer by writing it, saying we'll pass this off to another function which is going to deal with this. Okay, so let's say we'll call something called evaluate answer, and what we'll take is the user's response and the actual real answer. And maybe we won't call it evaluate answer, maybe we'll call it, stick with reasonable terminology, evaluate response. So that really didn't do anything, that just meant we have to define another function, but let's just do that in maybe a cleaner place. Okay, so the user types something, and which is in this variable response, and we know the correct answer which was given to us. What can we try and do? Check if they're exactly the same? That's the default sort of thing, right? So maybe this thing should return true if the response is correct and false otherwise. And maybe the sort of default thing to do is just to say what we'll return is true exactly when the response is equal to the answer. Okay. So what comes back to us is some truth value. And if it comes back as true, then we can say correct. Otherwise, we can say incorrect and tell them what the correct answer was. Okay, though it may look strange on a map, to get from Lower to Upper Egypt, you go in this direction. I would say not north, because it's too obvious. South. Okay, evaluate response is not defined. And why is evaluate response not defined? Is that because I forgot to load or because I forgot to save? A typo where I called it. Response. Good. It's good to remember. That's good, careful reading. Many of us are blind to things where what we read is what we intended to put there rather than what's actually there. So it's good that you're able to catch that. Okay, the elements. This element can be found in limestone, derives its name from the Latin word for lime, C-A-L-X. I think it's probably calcium. Incorrect. The correct answer was calcium. Oh, what's wrong? Yeah. So our test for evaluating responses was we just check if the response is exactly the same as the answer. My answer was calcium with a lowercase c, but the answer in the thing is calcium with an uppercase c. So we have seen now already a trick for when we have two things and we want to compare them up to some kinds of differences. For example, we saw that when we were doing these anagrams, the way to do that was to take both things and convert them to some standard form and see, once we've converted them to the standard form, if they're the same. And for strings, an obvious kind of standard form is to convert them to lowercase. Okay? So before I compare these things, I will convert both the answer and the response to lowercase. Let's try that. And I'm going to do something else just to make our lives easier for testing. Oh no, maybe I'll wait. Okay, categories Bismarck, 1890 cartoon scene. This one contains a link to a URL. Shows Bismarck and this man who dismissed him. No idea. Let's play again. To make these on your own, cube day-old bread, fry in butter, oil, and garlic, then bake. These must be croutons, right? Correct. Okay. And if we look in this file, that is the Jeopardy questions.csv file. That's interesting. Actually, there it is. It was already in lowercase as an answer. So we don't know if it worked or not, but converting to lowercase, this method does work in Python, and it would have worked no matter how we typed our answer. Okay, so any questions so far? So far we've created a game that when we play it, it asks one question. Categories all dolled, or categories that'll be the day, value is $100. All dolled up, you're in this day's best. What? Sunday best? Maybe. So let's shout it then. Correct. So the correct answer was Sunday. And just so we can see what those answers are, even if we get them correct. Marlon Brando, Rod Steiger, Herbert Lom, a 19th century world leader. The role in common. No idea. King, maybe? Incorrect. Napoleon. No idea. God save the Queen. When domesticated, they're called poultry. This could be many things. What do you think the answer is? Is it chicken or just birds? A lot of things are called poultry, so I'd suspect it's something, a broader category than that, but we'll try chicken. Fowl. Certain kind of birds. Two-wheeled cab was named for a Brit, not for its good looks. No idea. Handsome cab. Master of Puppets and Death Magnetic. Somebody here must know this. Anybody is a metal fan here? Yeah. Metallica. Trick will be the spelling. Okay, good. So indeed, it didn't care that I spelled it with a capital A at the end, even though it's not like that in the answer. All right. So what's the next feature we can add? Okay, so we've got the thing asking one question now. So it asks the question and then decides whether the thing was correct or not, and prints correct or not. So maybe it should return the result. True if it was correct, and false if it was not. So let's repeatedly ask questions until the user runs out of lives. So while the lives is bigger than 0, we'll ask a question, and if that's true, meaning the user got the correct answer, then don't do anything really. I don't know, you can just print good job. Otherwise, if they get the wrong answer, then say you lose a life. And tell them how many lives they have remaining. Okay. Once all that's over, we print game over. Okay. Tagline for this Jackie Chan Chris Tucker sequel exclaimed, "Get ready for a second rush." So it was rush hour but I hope I enter it the right way. Rush hour 2 or rush hour 2. All right, correct, rush hour 2. Category, a stockpile. X marks the spot for this company spun off from USX in 2002. No idea. Anybody know? No. U.S. Steel. Lots of folks wear glasses in this state. It's the only one with 4 eyes. All right, correct. Good job. So, 1971, those were the days for this show. Happy Days, maybe? Nope, incorrect. All in the Family. Fictional characters. In The Bell Jar, Doreen is picked up by Lenny Shepard, a New York disc jockey. I'm not even sure what the question should be, or what the answer should look like. You say, I don't know. Sylvia Plath. Okay, you lose a life, 0 lives remaining, game over. All right, so there's some issues still. It all kinds of tend to run together too much. You need some dramatic pauses, which we can insert here. So when you ask a question and then it gets answered, a couple of things. You probably want to just put in some extra space and maybe sleep for, just give the person like a 2-second break before the next question. So they have enough time to read the comments. Okay, Shakespearean characters. Portia disguises herself as a male lawyer in this play set in Italy. Merchant of Venice? I don't know. I'm not any Shakespeare. Correct. Recent films. This title, Stone Age Family, was in Viva Rock Vegas. Surely someone knows this. Flintstones, good. Americana. What's that? Yeah. So in this game, if we really want to polish it, that's where we would have to spend a lot of time taking the game from 90% done to 100% done. We'd have to spend time studying how we can take things that are like approximately correct and decide, yeah, close enough. So things like stripping thes off of there, maybe even correcting small typos. So there's a whole field that we could look at of basically what we call distances between strings, and we could accept answers that are close in some sense to the correct answer. For us now, we're just converting to lowercase. Maybe we can try something a bit more at the end. We'll see if we need it. But that's like far down on the list of playability things. Okay, so what comes next? The next feature. So we have a game now. It repeats. There's lives. We don't have a score. I guess we could do that. Yeah. Could you make it end up with a certain amount of questions correct? You mean it should end when you get enough? Oh, I would never want the game to end while the user can still, maybe after they've answered 260,000 questions or something, but I wouldn't want it to end because they they made it to the end. That's kind of a, well, I mean, that's kind of a thing that happens in some video games, and even some text, adventure type games. But for trivia games, I wouldn't want to impose the sort of artificial end like that. Yeah.
As it is now, though it might be unlikely, isn't there a chance that someone could get the same question more than once?
There is a chance that someone could get the same question more than once. How unlikely is it? Well, there's 260,000 questions, and you may or may not have heard of something called the birthday paradox. So if I repeatedly pick a random element from a set of, let's say the set is of size n, then somewhere around, after I've picked about square root n elements, I should expect to see the same thing twice. So it's usually phrased in terms of birthdays. There are 365 days in the year. Usually if you get enough people in a room and there's more than the square root of 365 of them, then you expect to see two people with the same birthday. It's the same thing. So the square root of 230,000, or whatever the number of lines was in this file, that's still pretty big. It's longer than we'll play in this class. But indeed, you could do that. If I were to do that, then maybe what I would do is shuffle the questions rather than pick them at random. Shuffle them so that they're now randomly ordered, and then repeatedly remove the last question from the list. So remove it and ask it. Then you'll never ask it again. In fact, then you'll go the full 260,000 questions before you run out. Then you could end the game. Say, congratulations, you made it to the end. But yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about it for now. So a score we could use, and how about difficulty? Is there any way we can control difficulty in this game? Yeah. Yeah, so I'm not a huge Jeopardy fan, but I get the feeling, and it's hard to tell, but I get the feeling that the dollar amount is somehow a reflection of the difficulty of the question, roughly speaking. And so maybe what we want to do, a couple of things. We should keep a score, which the dollar amount can help with too. We can think of, you get that much money if you answer a question that's worth that much. But also, maybe we should start by asking $100 questions and then work our way up to 200, 300, 400, and so on. All right. So that is a feature that's going to take some work. So when we read these questions, all we've been doing is reading them all and sticking them, just taking each one and adding it to our list of questions. Maybe we should organize them when we read them. Now, in the file, they don't come nicely organized for us, so we'll have to do that ourselves, right? If we take a look at this file, then if I'm looking at dollar amounts over here, I see a $200 question, a $200 question, or maybe a $400 question, $400 question, but there's 260,000 of them, so $600 question. But I guess if I dig deeper into here, I'll also see there's $400 questions much later after the $600 questions. So they're not sorted by value. We'll need to somehow organize them. All right. So we read our row, which is actually a question. Where is that dollar value stored? Well, looking at it, it's not at position 0, not at position 1, not at position 2, not at position 3, at position 4. Okay. So value is that question at position 4. So what is that value? string. And worse than that, it's a string, it looks like it has some extra space around it. Okay. So I'm going to make a leap here. And so I want to convert this thing. So strings are not that useful for me because if I want to use these things as to help with the scoring, then I'll need to be able to add them together. So I need them converted to integers. And if I want to use them to sort into difficulty levels, then I also probably want them as integers, not as strings. So, because then I can do arithmetic on them that might help. So we're not sure what to do, so let's define a function, and let's say we'll write a function that takes a value and converts it to an int. So it takes one of these strings. And if I look at the Python documentation for strings, there is a method in there called strip. So let's try that. So there's one of these values. And if I say value.strip, I get a new string which takes away the white space. In fact, strip is a really useful thing anytime you're dealing with stuff that you read from files and stuff that you read from users. What strip does is it takes any white space off the beginning and end of a string. So if the user happens to finish their input with a space before they hit enter, or they hit a space before they entered anything, it can strip it off. So we can use it in other places too. So we can strip it down that way. Can I convert this to an int now? What happens if I take that and convert it to an int? I get a value error. Why do I get a value error? Yep. Because there's a dollar sign. So if I want to convert it to an int, I got to get rid of that dollar sign. But I know how to do that. So the dollar sign now is just occupying the first character of the string, or the 0th character of the string. So all I want are the characters 1 up to the end of the string, which I know how to get. I start at position 1, and I go right up to the end. Okay. So I take the value, I strip it to get rid of any white space that comes before or after, and then I, again, strip off that dollar sign by just taking the second, or the 1th character up to the end. Okay, so let's try that. So what we return is an int value dot strip, starting at position 1 and going right up to the end. Okay, so now I can say value is value to int row at 4. Okay, so when I'm reading the file, I get this value. What can I do with this thing? Well, let's just do something silly right now. And just print it. There's going to be a lot of output. So here we see a problem. What went wrong there? It says there was an error, invalid string literal for int with base 10 ALU. Some little detail that we saw at the beginning and then forgot about. Yep. Sure. I mean, it did something. But it's saying that the string that it was trying to convert was, I mean, we looked at it. We stripped it to get rid of any spaces, and we took off the first character. So I'm guessing that was the string that said value. But that's not what these things are supposed to look like, right? They're supposed to be a number sign, and then some things. So where did that happen? Yeah? Yeah. So remember, the first row in the file was the header thing. And so that's unlike every other row in the file. It's just for people to look at so they understand what's in there. We've already looked at it. We know the format. So we'd like to skip that thing. And we saw, or I glossed over, we can skip something, or we can get the next row in the file just by saying next. And in this case, I'm going to get it and then just discard it because I don't want the first one. And actually, that shows that we had a bug hiding in there all along, but that we would have only discovered after playing this game about 260,000 times. Because there was one thing in there, in that array, that was not a question. And it would look weird when we tried to print it. But eventually we might have come across it. But we'd have to play the game a long time before we found that bug. All right. Let's see if that... Okay. So here's stuff that comes out. Aha! We got an exception very quickly. What's the problem now? Comma. All right. So we need to do some more stripping. Let's see how we can deal with that thing. Okay, so let's say value is equal to 2,000. So I need to get rid of those commas. So that's something like, I think, this might do it. No. Replace. I'd like to take each comma and replace it with nothing. Okay. So, back up here. We take the value, we strip it, and then we replace every occurrence of a comma with nothing. And then we take all the characters starting at 1 to the end. In fact, you see then there's another way we could have done this, is we could have also replaced dollar signs with nothing, but let's leave it at that, see if this works. Invalid literal for int with base 10, 1. Okay, so somewhere in that file there's a problematic line that for some reason the value there is odd looking. I don't even know what it would be. It's not too far in. So, but we are getting questions with values 200, 400, 600, 800. We seem to be getting a good number of values here. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to punt this and say, look, I got 260,000 questions. Anything that gives me too much trouble, I'm just going to ignore. Okay? And what do I have for that? Or how can I do that? Well, here's the place where the problem is happening. When I try and convert this value to an int, sometimes things go wrong. And what I'll do is I'll wrap that whole thing in a try except statement. And what was the error? I don't care what the error was. If anything goes wrong, I just don't want to do anything. So I convert the value to an int, or at least I try to. If anything goes wrong, and if it works, then I add it to this list of questions. If that doesn't work, then I'm going to pass on this thing, skip that value entirely, and just move on to the next row. Okay, good. So So lots and lots of questions there, and lots of dollar values. All right. So what do you see about these values? What's special about these values? Are there any $5 questions? Are there any $100 questions? $150 questions? No. Starts at 200, and so they're all multiples of 200. So if I'm going to convert these somehow to sort of difficulty levels, then I should divide by 200, right? So if I take each of those values and divide by 200, then I get difficulty levels starting at 1 and going up to something big, I don't know, 17, 80. Okay. I don't know how big they get. That's something we'll explore. But let's, so what is it that we're trying to do? We're trying to sort these questions into various levels of difficulty. And so rather than just one big list of questions, I'm going to make a list which begins with all the difficulty 1 questions, and all the difficulty 2 questions, and all the difficulty 3 questions, and so on. And so that's going to look something like this. We'll say I'm going to create a new list. It contains a bunch of lists, and it contains for x in range. You thought you saw the value 80? Let's see. Okay, so rather than a single list of questions, I'm going to make a whole bunch of lists of questions. I'll try making 50 of them, see if that's enough. So all this is a list comprehension that says count from 0 up to 49 and make me a list that contains a new list for each of those things. So there's nothing in these lists. This is just a list of empty lists. But now when I get a value, I can convert that to a difficulty. So that should be the value divided by 200. That gives me one of these numbers that starts at 1. And I'm going to use it as a list index, so I'll subtract 1. And then I'm not going to add this question. I'm going to add this question to a very specific list. Questions at difficulty dot append row. All right, let's try that. So the rest of the thing will break now, but let's see that we got this right. So questions equals read questions. Okay, so now if I look at the length of questions, it says it's 50. And so where are those 260,000 questions? Well, now they're all split up in different lists. So if I look at questions at 0 and ask its length, those should be the $200 questions, and there are 39,000 of those. And I can inspect one of those things. Questions at 0 at 1. Questions at 0 at 1. Indeed, that's a $200 question. Okay. Questions at 0 at 2. Yeah, it's a $200 question. 3, that's a $200 question. So if I look at questions at 1, those should be the $400 questions. And there's 51,000 of those. And I can inspect a few of them to make sure they're right. Yep, that's a $400 question. That's a $400 question. That's a $400 question. And so on. Okay? All right. So this read questions function, we've just changed it. It doesn't just return one giant list of all the questions. Now it returns a list of lists. And the easy questions are in the list, the 0th list, and the harder ones are in the 1th list, and so on. So they're sorted by difficulty now. So if I just wanted to make things simpler, or just to test the whole thing again, then when I ask a question, I can't give it just that list of the lists of lists. Ask a question is expecting a list of questions, so I'll give it just a list of easy questions, just to see that it works. Okay. So this is interesting. There were questions with odd values, $300, but our code handles that. It's just treating them like the same as $200 questions, because we just divided by 200 without any remainder. 4-letter term for the part of a letter highlighted here in the middle. Body. Of course, the body of a letter. Tea time. A group of people appointed for a specific function, like the Senate Judiciary one. Committee. Henry VI was 9 months old when he succeeded his dad, Henry V, as king of this in 1422. I'm guessing England? Good. And indeed, these $200 questions seem to be a little bit easier than these random ones we were picking that included big ones. Which country outlawed golf, soccer, and other sports that were taking young men away from military training? Well, golf is old, but not so old, right? So it started in Scotland. So maybe Scotland, England. Jimmy Carter speaking from the Carter Center, Atlanta. From Latin, I forbid. It's what I did to 31 very bad bills passed by veto. What was a mousquetaire hat adorned with? Feather. One or more of these, so maybe feathers. Feather. Okay, so you see there's some work that needs to be done on parsing these answers. Feathers should have been acceptable in that case. We can work on that. The Sunday before Easter is commonly called, what's that? Sunday before Easter, I don't know actually. There's Good Friday, it's Easter Sunday, the Sunday before Easter. Is that Palm Sunday? Something I remember from, it's a phrase that I remember, good job. 600-pound American black bear lived in Florida Everglades with the Wedlows. TV show. Who? Smokey. With an EY? Incorrect. Gentle Ben. Okay. All right. So that's just a quick test for getting a version of the game that only asks simple questions. But now we can have it ramp up, right? We can do scoring, and we can do more difficult questions. So let's do that. So questions is read questions, lives equals this. What's the score? Starts at 0. All right. So when you get a question right, so let's say something like, when I ask a question, I'm going to ask your score divided by 1,000. That'll be the level of difficulty. So then if you get something like, five $200 questions right, then you'll move on to $400 questions. If you get 5 of those right, you move on to $600 questions. Yeah. What's that? The total. Well, I mean, it's whatever we implement, but let's make it the total. And let's be a little bit more explicit. So we'll say that the difficulty is your score divided by 1,000. We'll ask a question with that difficulty. And your score is going to increase by the difficulty plus 1 times 200. Okay, and after each time you answer a question, right or wrong, you'll get to see your score. Let's see how that goes. All right, let's try our best here. 16 of these make an avoirdupois pound. Avoirdupois pound. Ounces. Ounces. All right. This TV superhero flies in an invisible plane, but how does she find it? This is an old TV superhero, but has a modern remake. Just had a movie made after. Wonder Woman. All right. A wrapped up baby is described as one of these happy packages. Bundle of joy? Incorrect. A bundle of joy. Before Elvis sang this song, Bing sang it in 1937's Waikiki Wedding. I don't know. I'm neither an Elvis nor a Bing Crosby fan. Let's see if we can at least score 1,000 here. Vegetable fat used in soap and cosmetics is a byproduct of the chocolate industry. Cocoa butter? Chinese discovered that this practice using needles could work as an anesthetic. Acupuncture. In the early 60s, this martial arts master waited tables at Seattle's Ruby Chow's restaurant. I would guess Bruce Lee, just because there's not that many options. All right, score is 1,000, and now we have a $400 question. All right, so now you guys just shout out answers to me. Louder. I still can't hear. Gacko. Spell it. Jacael. Jackal. Like so? Jackal. Oh, you mean jackal. The jackal. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Okay. So there you go. We managed to make more or less the whole thing.